Healthy systems of control involve rules that make sense, clear checks and balances on power, responsive and respectful leadership, and goals that are attainable and beneficial for everyone. Unhealthy systems of control treat people like cogs in a machine, and they require total submission and unquestioning obedience, regardless of the personal cost. People who want to persuade others and make them comply use many different influence tactics, and Cialdini found that the majority of these tactics fall within 6 basic categories, each governed by a fundamental psychological principle that directs human behavior. These psychological principles are what make these tactics so effective, and in cultic systems of influence, Cialdini's 6 principles of influence work in these ways. 1. Reciprocity. Reciprocity engages your desire to give back by offering you something valuable. They offered me perfection and salvation, so I felt obliged to follow them with absolute dedication. Social proof. Social proof tells you that something is safe and acceptable. Everybody else is going along, and nobody is complaining, so it must be okay. There must be something wrong with me if I feel weary and things don't make sense. 3. Authority. Authority engages automatic respect. Early in life, I was taught to respect authority figures: parents, teachers, crossing guards, policemen, doctors. So why would I question this superior being with great wisdom who is telling me what to do? 4. Consistency. People want to be seen as consistent. They don't want to appear mistaken or foolish. Cialdini notes that automatic consistency functions as a shield against thought. So it should not be surprising that such consistency can be exploited by those who would prefer that we not think too much in response to their request for compliance. If I make a public commitment, I'll try to see it through, even if I have reservations and concerns. 5. Liking. Liking engages powerful social longings. Someone I know and I like is asking me to attend a social study session. Why shouldn't I go? When I do go, I'm surrounded by friendly, hopeful people who invite me back. Why shouldn't I go back to the next session? Besides, the leader gave me the most glorious compliment: love bombing. So why shouldn't I trust him? He seems so likable. 6. Scarcity. Scarcity breeds desire. The group is telling me that their way is the only way. How can I pass up this incredible opportunity? In many instances, systems of influence such as public health campaigns can have positive effects on individuals. But in cults, these systems aren't focused on well-being of individuals. Instead, they are focused entirely on the needs of the cult and its leader. And on turning idealistic people into fully committed and obedient cult members, in exchange for a sense of meaning, purpose, and deep belonging. Each cult member is required to give up her sense of self, her individuality, and her identity. When a system is toxic, its structure crushes, demeans, and dehumanizes the people trapped within it. With the help of the bounded choice model, we can see that toxic systems of control use cult members' hard work, obedience, and need for community against them. Though cult members may gain a sense of pride through fitting in and following the rules perfectly, this form of pride has a tragic outcome because it depends on the good opinion of people who actually mean harm to the members. Hard work, community values, and obedience are excellent qualities. However, when they are required by an inhumane and toxic system of control, they lead to enslavement. Breaking free from toxic systems of control can be painful and difficult, but it can be done. Social and emotional encouragement and guidance. Groups can teach us how to belong, how to share core principles, and how to get into sync with other group members in healthy groups. These systems of influence support individuality and personal freedom while simultaneously helping group members feel as if they belong. For example, a respectful soccer coach helps her team do their best and supports an atmosphere of respect and excellence that permeates throughout the team. Soon, team members will support each other and strive toward personal excellence as a way to demonstrate their dedication to the coach, to the team, and to each other as individuals. Healthy and successful groups develop an internal identity that is respectful of each individual's strengths and challenges. These groups are open to change and growth. They're mindful of the well-being of the group as a whole. Abusive and high-demand groups strip away individuality, are rigid and perfectionistic, and place the needs of the group leader and/or the transcendence belief system above all other things. These unhealthy groups use constant peer pressure to enforce intense and self-sacrificing commitment until unquestioning obedience to the group's beliefs, rules, and expectations become a daily or even hourly task. An essential aspect of unhealthy influence is that the leader and all members of the group can criticize or report those who stray from the perfect path. And in this toxic environment of self-sacrifice and constant criticism, external and internal, people can become sealed into what Janja calls bounded reality, from which it is extremely difficult to escape. On one hand, people sealed into these systems of influence are striving toward perfection in a group of absolutely dedicated people who are their friends, family, and community, such that leaving would feel like losing everyone and everything they care about. On the other hand, the group's constant manipulation and perfectionistic expectations keep members so hyper-focused on performance and so unsure of themselves that they don't have the time, space, or energy they need to even think about leaving. The group is everything and everyone they know. Their leader is like a god, or may actually claim to be the reincarnation of God, or Jesus, or Krishna, or Buddha, or whatever. Their group's perfect path is the only answer. Therefore, their only real choice is a bounded choice. To obey fully, eliminate all of their doubts and their individual needs, and commit themselves completely, or risk losing everything. Shelley Rosen, a relational psychotherapist who has worked with former cult members for over 30 years, notes that the trauma of life in a cult, particularly for children, elicits a type of stress response that can be overwhelming. Often this stress response gets stuck as a result of social and emotional captivity. According to Rosen, cult involvement has the potential to be one of the most traumatizing of human experiences. Robert Naviaux describes this being stuck on as a chronic cell danger response reaction. Naviaux cell danger response and a nervous system under threat. The cell danger response, CDR, is the evolutionarily conserved metabolic response that protects cells and hosts from harm. It is triggered by encounters with chemical, physical, or biological threats and exceeds the cellular capacity for homeostasis. Dower, like hibernation, is a means of preserving survival by severely curtailing functions of ordinary life, such as energy, digestion, and movement. The study found that triggering events fell broadly into 5 groups. 1. Biological, viral, bacterial, fungal, mold, and parasitic infections. 2. Chemical exposures. 3. Physical trauma. 4. Psychological trauma. And cults are in this category. These different environmental stressors, in other words, trigger a similar hibernation freeze cell danger response in people. When the CDR gets stuck or is unable to overcome a danger, a second step kicks in that involves a kind of siege metabolism that further diverts resources away from mitochondria and sequesters or jettisons key metabolites and cofactors to make them unavailable to an invading pathogen, or acts to sequester toxins in specialized cells and tissues to limit systemic exposure. This has the effect of further consolidating the hypometabolic state. So while your body may have been affected by an infection or exposure to a toxin such as mold, your illness arose because of the cell danger response and all it entails, which includes potentially having difficulty getting rid of the infection or toxin. The chemical signature that we discover is evidence that it is a metabolic disorder that affects mitochondrial energy metabolism, immune function, GI function, the microbiome, the autonomic nervous system, neuroendocrine, and other brain functions. These 7 systems are all connected in a network that is in constant communication. While it is true that you cannot change one of these 7 systems without producing compensatory changes in the others, it is the language of chemistry and metabolism that interconnects them all. The science of traumatic stress. Neurobiology, epigenetics, and more demonstrate that subtle and overt types of trauma and adversity directly alter physiology, cell function, metabolism, immune and nervous system function, and other organic and biological activities to increase risk for autoimmune and other chronic physical diseases, among many other effects. In other words, you being in a cult and having been exposed to psychological trauma may lead to disease later in life as a result of the traumatic stress you were exposed to. The influences of emotional neglect from our adult caregivers or cult leaders and cult members all around you is the most profound and underestimated contributors to risk for chronic illness and other effects of trauma in our own lives and across generations and cultures. The absence of unconditional love and nurturing care, safety and support. As a result, misattunements, lack or losses of connection, failures of support and repair take place over a period of many years. They come from the people we imprint on and who we are genetically programmed to care about and need the most. The ones we depend on for our very survival. The ones we are designed to learn from as we develop the capacity to regulate our emotions and physiologies and learn about connection with. A lack of emotional connection and support therefore has deep and long-lasting influences on the development of all systems: nervous, immune, respiratory, gastrointestinal, emotional, psychological, cellular, epigenetic, and beyond. These are intrinsic reasons for why it's not psychological. Definitely, I regard my own time in the cult as traumatic. I still have occasional dreams where I am back in the cult, but knowing I am no longer a member, it's a very interesting split, kind of. You are aware that you don't belong, but still you see all these faces It is still a good sign because there is a very clear distinction between myself as an individual and those cult members that are still in the cult. When you are brainwashed and under undue influence, it really does a number on you. It took me years to disentangle my brain. I was so wired to obey and follow the rules and asking for permission to do something, stuff like that. When I was still in the cult, I did a lot of coping too, so-called disobedience, rebelling. Especially after I had that burnout in 2007. For 4 years, I disobeyed everywhere I could until I finally left the cult in 2011. Coping mechanisms for surviving abusive systems of control. The main ways that our narrators coped with the controlling systems in their cults was to rebel against them, either openly or subtly. Some rebelled outright, while others resisted internally through daydreams that took them to different lives, or through subtle rule-breaking that helped them feel some sense of autonomy in their extremely controlled worlds. So my way of disobedience, especially when I learned about how fake the guru actually was. He was a total fraud, pretending he was something else. He claimed to be the highest and last avatar. Well, so my disobedience, I completely stopped meditating. I didn't get up at 6 a.m. anymore, but just in time to go to work. And I also stopped singing all those stupid songs that we were supposed to sing. And finally, I started reading all the books that I wanted to read. This, for example, helped me understand what a psychopath is and how psychological trauma can influence the body, mind, and brain. Reading and learning is a privilege. Having been in the cult made me understand how precious it is to expand your knowledge constantly. Because learning never stops. You can always learn something new. Yeah, so then I also started taking Tai Chi and Kung Fu classes. And right after I left the cult, I went on a trip to China with the Tai Chi group. In the cult, we were forbidden to go on vacation just by ourselves. We had to use all our free time to go to trips and the celebrations in New York, or the so-called Christmas trip. It was always with the group. You couldn't go on vacation with somebody else outside of the group. So that trip to China was another big step out of the cult. That's me reading books on Tai Chi, which was very liberating because it opened up a new opportunity to get to know other people that were outside of the cult with different perspectives. So you begin to just step by step remove yourself of all the influence. You can literally call it deprogramming. And you peel away all those layers like an onion, or like one of those Russian dolls. You remove one fake personality after the other until you come to your core self. It's a slow process. It takes time until you find your very core of self and you build up your own sense of agency, a new foundation. So I also stopped going to those monthly weekend meetings. They were so stressful. You slept very little. And well, I used to go there and sleep in a hotel. And then we were supposed to be part of the 2-mile race the next day, but I felt this was too much stress, so I preferred to just eat my breakfast at the hotel when I had to pay so much. So at least enjoy it, right? So it was in itself an act of rebellion. And then we were supposed to always come at least once a week to the group meditation, and it was an hour long and there was a break in between, and I always fled the scene and went home so it wouldn't be so late when I got home. And then in the end I stopped going at all. But that was really at the end, almost before I wrote my resignation letter. So I had a kind of friend, or maybe we were just partners in crime of exiting the cult. And right after we left, we went to the cinema, which was also forbidden. I always loved that. And then we drank beer. Back then my body could still tolerate alcohol. Yeah, but it was mostly to rebel against the cult's rules. It was strictly forbidden in the cult to drink alcohol. So of course, as soon as we were out, we went to have a beer, as a celebration that we were free of the influence. For us, it was just a sign that we were really free of this following rules, but having our own sense of agency to decide what we wanted to do and what not. In trauma recovery, the sense of agency is very important, especially in somatic experience. For me, having control about what gets into my body or not, it is very, very sacred. It is abuse when somebody will force me to put something into my body that I know will cause bad reactions, a migraine, digestive issues, histamine issues. I want to be in control what gets into my body. The sense of agency scale, a measure of consciously perceived control over one's mind, body, and the immediate environment. I am in full control of what I do. My behavior is planned by me from the very beginning to the very end. And when you come out of a cult mentality, you have to actually retrain yourself so you are aware that you have a right to this sense of agency. No more rules. And by now I am also eating meat again. And this was very, very important to do for my health. And it helped clear thinking. Many cults push some type of restricted diet. Indian cults usually have the vegetarian type of diet. We know from the Seventh-day Adventists they were vegetarian too. And then you have the New Age cults, and many New Agers are also vegans or even fruitarians. Why the restricted diet? Because it will keep you hungry, it will keep you tired, depressed, and thus you get brain fogged and will not think clearly. So our cult was vegetarian too. I sure liked the food, but I was constantly looking for supplementing and something to make me feel better and less tired and less depressed. Yeah. The solution to that was eating meat. But we were forbidden to eat meat, and I was a vegetarian for 19 years. Imagine what that did to my system. But I started eating meat again, and it was really an epiphany. All my symptoms reversed. No brain fog, no depression, digestive issues gone, chronic pain gone. I still got migraines, but in comparison, wow, what a game changer. What a game changer. I talk about that on my other channel, Carnivore Epiphany 21. Vegetarianism is a thing of the past, and I will never go back there. The cult I was in, rebellion, was called disobedience, and when the Guru was still alive, he told us that our disobedience was the source of his chronic pain. So he blamed everything on us, when it was him who had an eating disorder. He was a complete sugar junkie. You see? Big belly. And lots of snacking. Those were shakes. I don't know what was in it, but definitely sugary, full of probably milk. He stuffed himself. He was so obese, constantly eating. Of course, his body was inflamed and he was in pain. And he died of a heart attack. Suffered a fatal heart attack. October 12, 2007. There you have it.
We're supported by the Irish Heart Disease Awareness Charity, which advocates a simple CT scan to reveal your CAC score. So, know your score and take action to prevent that premature heart attack.
Fructose, the combination of fructose, refined carbohydrate and polyunsaturated oils creates inflammation in every blood vessel wall and in every cell membrane in the body. And so our modern diet is highly inflammatory, and it's not just sugar, it's not just carbs, it's not just insulin. I think the polyunsaturated oils have a major incriminating role. If your diet is full of very high in polyunsaturated oils, the omega-6s, then that's going to be inflammatory. It's the combination of the three. So for personally, I have a low inflammatory diet. It's very low in sugar, very low in carbohydrate, very low in polyunsaturated seed oils, vegetable oils, whichever way you want to call it. So inflammation sits underneath every single modern disease. Our diet is the major producer of that. So the role of that is if you have inflammation in the blood vessel wall, over a long period of time, it's more likely to be injured. That's the cause of cardiac disease. Well, it's not just heart attacks, but it's cardiovascular disease.
To add to that about why cholesterol becomes harmful, it actually comes back down to sugar again if we're looking specifically at cholesterol. Most of you have probably heard about the small dense cholesterol particles. Well, they become small dense because they become glycated. And you've got proteins on these lipoprotein particles, and the B100 protein that identifies the LDL particles can become damaged by sugar. And when that becomes damaged, there's actually been studies that have been done in Japan that actually show the size of those particles then become smaller, and that then becomes what's defined as small dense. And because this receptor has been damaged, the cholesterol is not able to be taken out of circulation by the liver, so then it ends up being taken out of circulation by these macrophages, which then bury it inside the lining of the blood vessels. So at the end of the day, when you're worrying about cholesterol, so it's true, Marianne intimated before, that high saturated fat diets make your cholesterol go up, but it's sugar that makes your cholesterol go bad.
So basically, what he is saying here, my physical body is suffering so much. There are many people who suffer physically, but who make faster than the fastest progress. And again, there are many who are physically fit, but who do not think of God, do not think of inner progress. So when you suffer, you make spiritual progress in a nutshell. Which is fucking bullshit. We are what we eat.
The title question, I guess, why do we get sick? It's the answer seems to be insulin resistance. So I guess how does that develop in a human being? I guess over the course of their lifetime.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the purpose of the book was really kind of being my main thesis as a scientist, which was we are overlooking the most critical feature of health, clinically and personally. We if we're not looking at insulin resistance in the context of these chronic diseases, we are very likely not looking at the chronic disease correctly, or at least appreciating all of its facets, and thus not treating it as effectively as we could. So case in point, with the progression of type 2 diabetes, which is one of the most common diseases in the country, over time, insulin is climbing as the body becomes progressively more insulin resistant. And I'll mention the causes, Matt, that you asked about in just a sec. Insulin's climbing, but it's able to keep glucose in control, but it's becoming more and more resistant to its own insulin. And eventually the body becomes so resistant to its own insulin that now it can't make any more, even though it's still very high. And now, 10 or 20 years later, now the glucose starts to climb. That conventional medicine doesn't care about the insulin. The physician isn't even looking at the insulin, and the patient isn't even asking about it, not thinking about it. It's only once the glucose starts to climb that conventional medicine will detect the problem. But unfortunately, that glucose-centric paradigm of type 2 diabetes also, it leads us to not only detect the problem much too late, or much later, I should say, but we also treat it much worse. Because if we're just looking at it as a glucose problem, then we don't care that we would say, you just need to start taking insulin therapy, or we're going to give you a drug to boost up your insulin even more. It was already high, and it always is in type 2 diabetes. Now we push it up even higher, and hey, look at that glucose level. We get it right back into normal range, but we know that the more aggressively we have to treat type 2 diabetes by giving them more insulin, their risk of dying from heart disease is tripled, their risk of dying from cancer is doubled, and they're typically going to gain about 20 pounds in the first 6 months.